It's 6 minutes past 10 o'clock. It's time for Presspass, and this is what's coming up. Have linked the survey
that focused on perception of
in every survey.
Has been a talk of town. We are looking at one of the latest polls that has everyone reacting and talking about.
On that corruption scandal, hustler ni corrupt. Let's be honest to ourselves.
Hiyo research ni ya uongo kabisa.
We did a form of a mini poll ourselves from 2 counties, and you want to hear their responses on this.
You have to just sit there for a few minutes to tell a story, but then they live this life every single day.
Charity Mwangi shares her experience of telling the story of senior citizens struggling to make it in the city in our backstory. So on Wednesday, August the 22nd, Ipsos released its second quarter 2018 survey, household survey, conducted between 25th July and the 2nd of August 2018. The survey covered a broad range of economic, political, and other subjects, in addition to the main focus being the governance issue of corruption. It sampled 2,016 adults living in urban and rural areas and spread across 46 counties. Well, we did a very short and random version of our poll in 2 counties to get the opinion of a handful of people, and this is what they had to say.
Uchunguzi au survey iliyofanywa na Ipsos Synovate hivi juzi, tungependa kuikemea na kusema hiyo research ni ya uongo kabisa, kwa sababu hapa Wasingishu hatukuweza kuwaona watu wa Ipsos Synovate. Mimi naona ni mpango wa watu wanasiasa wabaya ambao wanataka kuharibia Mheshimiwa William Ruto, kijana wa nyumbani jina.
Wacha watu wakuja watuambie hii mambo wanaongea mambo na siasa. Ni nani huyo ambaye hajaiba? Ni nani mwenyewe hajakosea? So before tuseme Ruto ni mwizi, before tuseme Waiguru ni mwizi, watuambie. Hakuna venye nitaenda kushika naiba mwingine huko na baba yangu ni mwizi.
Ruto at first place, alimsupport our dear president, and because sai tuna target kumsupport, it's not fair because wanaleta hizi news about corruption na wanamweka at first place. Ni kumharibia jina.
Mimi na support hustler, but on that corruption scandal, hustler ni corrupt. Let's be honest to ourselves. Hustler ni corrupt na tumeona. But then again, people are here talking wanaingiza politics ya 2022, but hustler is corrupt in short.
I think venye ile research ilifanywa na hao wafanya about corruption, I think walifanya poa, but hawaangalii pia down. Wanaangalia wenye wako juu. Obvious corruption kama uko juu, pia down corruption haiwezi kosa.
That company that told us about them, Ruto being 1, Waiguru 2, on my side, I don't agree with them. Unless they just come with the truth of the matter, they tell us this is what they did, this is what they did, the way they have been doing to others, then they come to us clearly, we have to understand, and it will be true to us also.
The media have always leaned on the wrong side. The media right now focuses mostly on politics, and mostly media favors some personalities in politics. People are paid to write content. So right now media doesn't do enough when it comes to corruption and politics.
Mimi na big up sana media, because media inatufanya sisi tunajua siri, tunajua mahali kweli iko. So media iko sawa, inafaa iko wazi.
According to me, the media, they are missing mark, because you should be able to give us the right information at the right time and in the right manner.
Media, they normally produce what they've gathered from people, and from my side. But from the other people, I cannot tell, because you cannot just come up with the information, then you relay it out without having got it truly or without having fully been informed.
Just a handful of views from some of you in Nairobi and others in Eldoret, and I'll take it to my panelists just to give us some initial reactions to this. Tom Wolf, he's a research analyst at Ipsos, and next to him is Media Council CEO David Omoyo, and also next to him is Patrick Gadara. He is a communicator, or communications consultant, I should put it, as well as a curator at theelephant.org, and he'll give us his view. He's a media critic, and that's why we have him essentially here to let us know what he thinks about the work of media and in breaking down the numbers. Tom, wouldn't call it scientific, those vox pops that we put out there, but from what you hear, what's your view and reaction?
Well, thanks, Mark. My first reaction is that for those of us who are a bit senior, it is still a celebration to live in a country where people feel free enough to express their views, whatever those views happen to be. Because I say some of us who've been here longer remember a time when people didn't feel they could speak freely. So that's the first and I think the most important thing, just speaking personally. One can hear, and we could spend more time in detail, how important the media is as a bridge of information between anything that makes news and what the public receives and understands. I mean, one of the things we try to do in many of our questions, before we ask a substantive question, such as an opinion, we try to find out at least a little bit what people know about the topic. For example, when we have been asking questions about people's views on the deployment of the KDF in Somalia with AMISOM, we first ask all our respondents, in what neighboring country is the Kenyan military currently deployed? Because it would be, it would invite a lot of, well, more baseless opinions if people don't even know that the Kenyan military is there. So when we're listening to such expressions from citizens, we don't know what's their sort of information level about the issue, or even how much information that they got about the survey before they freely expressed their views.
Some themes that we can get into the latest poll that you released and the results that you released on Wednesday. David, you heard one of them saying media missed the mark in your view as you followed from the release of those results to this particular day, current day, the reactions that have been and how this has been portrayed in media.
First is that we are in a country that attacks everyone we do not agree with. We have attacked the religious leaders, the judiciary, or camp of Kofi Annan and all that. So it's very normal that we had, ideally we expected these attacks.
Yes.
The rule is that you release something we do not want, we will attack you. So when I saw the attacks that came, then I realized, okay, someone did not want this out, and this is happening. Secondly is that the media has a commitment to the story. Your allegiance is to the story and nothing else. So if you have allegiance to the Ipsos, for example, or the person mentioned in the poll, then you're missing the point. Allegiance and commitment to the story and nothing else. Thirdly, they talk about the difference between journalism and public relations, is that in journalism you are publishing or broadcasting what someone does not want you to do. And in this case, definitely, many people did not want the media to amplify the poll. And that means that that was journalism.
And is it just about amplifying and saying what results Tom and the team came up with, in your view?
Well, I think our media didn't really say what results they came up with. I think in a very real sense, the media waits to see the take that politicians have about it and then run after them. So everybody focuses on what Ruto says, you know, and his reaction to it, or what Waiguru's reaction is, you know. And we kind of try to sensationalize it, if you will.
In your view, was this, in this case, was it?
I think it was. I think the poll itself, when you look at the findings, there are some really interesting findings. For example, I mean, just one example is that of all the regions we have, it's only the Northeast that thinks the country is going in the right direction. And I'd have thought that somebody in the media would stand up and say, well, why do they think that? You know,
yes.
How do we explain that? You know, some of the things that are not mentioned by even people who say it's going in the wrong direction. We've had a whole discussion about debt. Yet when people are asked, you know, what is going wrong in the country, there's no mention of debt, or there's not a lot of mention of debt. So I think those are, for me, some of the things that we should really be digging into and trying to understand what is the psyche of people when it comes to how they actually think. You know, so it's not just about the numbers themselves, but what's the story behind the numbers? I don't think our media really goes into that.
And in this case, we'll examine it further and see how we could change that in the days to come. Let me just take it on a different focus just for a moment, and then I'll settle in with the panel. On tonight's Backstory, we like to appreciate what journalists are doing, not just here at Nation, but from all other media houses. As whoever is open to cooperate with us, we will shine a light on the stories that they're doing. And this is on our segment, The Backstory, and we feature NTV journalist Charity Mwangi. Charity, who specializes in human interest stories, reflects on her last feature story, Old in the City. Old in the City tells the story of elderly persons forced to retire in the city. Their retirement in the city breaks away from what has until now been the norm, where retired persons are typically expected, like my shosho, to retreat to the village. But as Charity discovered, the city is their village. Here's a backstory.
I specialize in telling human interest stories, and at times it takes me in very uncomfortable situations whereby you feel as though you've been a little bit sheltered, that it hits you very strongly finding out that people are living in very difficult circumstances. It causes you to be thankful about how your life has been and how it's going. And also you come alive to the fact that other people are not as privileged as you've been. And at times you seem ignorant because you've lived a sheltered life, and seeing these people, you can't help but be shocked. And to take an example of the feature that I did, I had gone to do another story, a story about a community living in Soweto slums who had been asked to pay for legal fees for them to get title deeds for their pieces of land. And while there, I met a community of old people who were living in very deplorable situation. And so I wondered why they were still in the city, why they had not retired, because ideally, in the African setting, old people are supposed to move back to the rural areas and for their children to take care of them. What stays with me the most is the spirit of these women. Some of them never complained. They were acknowledging the fact that this is the life that they have and they cannot change anything about it. They are appreciative of the fact that God sends help to them every single day. Most of them, that's what they were saying. They are not beggars, but every single day they get someone who comes and visits them and brings them something to eat. And so you just see the resilience in their spirit. And it checks you whenever you look back and look at moments that you have complained about, difficult circumstances that were not so difficult owing to what you have just witnessed. I think I tried to be empathetic, not to show them in a very bad light. I wanted people to see their vulnerability but still maintain their dignity. And so I didn't take shots that could have evoked more action from government. And I received a phone call from the director of social protection who promised to help one of the women get an ID card that would allow her to be put on the register for social protection. I'm yet to get any feedback from him or the women whether that has been done. And I think if I used those, if I can say, I don't know how to describe those pictures, but if I could have used those more powerful pictures, maybe we could have gotten the answers that we need and we could have gotten more action from the right people. The impact I wanted the story to have was I wanted people to do things differently, because already it is clear that we're not taking care of the aging community well. I would want the generation that is to come to be more loving to our parents, because these people gave their lives to take care of other people, but now in their sunset years, they don't have anyone to take care of them. And so the impact I wanted to leave telling this story is that we can check ourselves as a society and see that there's something wrong. We are losing our humanity, and we ought to do things differently. There was one of the women told me that her grandson tries to kick her out of her piece of land. This piece of land that she doesn't even have money to pay legal fees for. And so I think our society is sick, and we have to come alive to the fact that we are losing our humanity and something needs to be done.
And we keep celebrating journalism, work that's done, people that go out of their way to tell the story of Kenyans and bring it to you, and we'll keep bringing that segment to you every week. Now, soon after the release of the first quarter social, political, economic and cultural survey, there was a lot of heat generated from the findings, especially on corruption. Here's some of the initial responses from Deputy President William Ruto and Kirinyaga Governor Anne Waiguru, who were polled as most corrupt in Kenya.
Unaona wanazunguka kwa magazeti, wamejaza maneno porojo ya ufisadi kwa magazeti, wamejaza story headline kwa magazeti. Hawa watu mimi nataka niwaeleze, wakimalizana na kuandika headline na opinion poll ya bure, tukutane kwa wananchi.
Unaweza ambao wache siasa, lakini unapigwa na siasa. Na ukipigwa na siasa lazima urudisha na nini? Na siasa. Kwa sababu huwezi rudisha na uteknokrasia, ama tuanze kuongea maneno mengine.
All of this story about constant, perennial, unending headlines about William Ruto this, William Ruto that, opinion poll this, corruption the other, is sponsored by our competitors because they cannot match our development record.
So there are two issues here, and that is, first of all, response to the poll results, and now the headlines that came after that, and the focus that was given to the story. And I just want to give an opportunity to give clarity to this. I mean, there's mention of sponsors, being from the competition. Can you clarify on this, or whether, there is any political sponsor that came to you in relation to this poll and tasked you to do it?
Well, I'm an analyst. I don't deal with management issues.
Right.
I mean, if a client comes to us and says, we would like to put in 10 questions in your next survey about chemical-treated mosquito nets or something like that, I usually would know about that because we have to work out the question wording with the clients. But I can say that for what we released on Wednesday last week, those were all Ipsos questions.
Yeah, and it was released, or it was dismissed as fake news from the get-go, and detraction of sorts. Were you surprised with this response?
Not really. I mean, I've been doing this kind of work for over 10 years now, gone through 3 elections. Now, it's true, most of the unhappiness that has been expressed with our results has taken place in just prior to elections.
Right.
So in some sense, this is interesting, but Not really surprising. I mean,
okay.
We're pretty used to different reactions.
All right.
So.
And to you, David Omoy, as a journalist, would you, put blame on the media or most of the media houses for having put the focus on one of the slides there that shows those who are most corrupt? That is the Deputy President and Anne Waiguru, according to this poll findings. Where was the story in this case, in your view?
As an individual journalist, I would say that, yes, we rushed for the sensational headline in the entire release and left out important matters about Kenyans' understanding of other important national issues, the handshake, development, international relations, and all that. So rather, the survey really had other very important and deep issues that were totally ignored. And it is typical for our media to sensationalize headlines and leave out critical matters. That has happened a lot. While we really reserve and respect the role that the editorial decision of a media house must be left to the editors there. I call it the sacred role of the newsroom must be left to the people there.
Yes.
But a few times I think that we over-sensationalize and we leave out very important critical details. We fail to ask important questions, so you just collect and see all that is being mentioned and run with it, eventually coming later to interrogate or refusing to answer questions, so that you end up, after you read the long story in the paper, watch some article on TV, you are left with a few questions unanswered. Yet the essence of a news article, whether print or electronic, is to answer those questions of the traditional 5 Ws and H and go deeper and explain it. So we have seen a continuous, like now, I don't think Kenyans understand what else was in the poll.
Okay.
Except that was picked on.
Although, if I may,
yes.
And I'm not saying this just because I'm at NTV, which is part of the Nation Media Group, but the first article in the Nation that appeared on Thursday was co-authored. I don't remember the woman's name, but the fellow, the journalist, was Kennedy Kimanthi. And I was surprised and very, very impressed by the fact that 2 days later, in the Saturday Nation, Mr. Kimanthi wrote almost a whole page discussing some of these other issues in the survey. Not that we covered, as I say, many of these issues we haven't released yet, but especially on the economic condition of the country. And he went very deeply into this question about Kenya's direction. I thought that was very, very laudable, that he took an extra 48 hours to go back to the data and get away from the more dramatic issue of some individuals who were mentioned to actually analyze the data.
Perhaps,
so I was impressed by that.
Yes, and credit to them, to a team at Daily Nation. But perhaps this explains then, after a few days, you have time to process and digest some of this information. But do you mistake the media for, the first day, in fact, this 24th slide of the 40-page slide that you have, the PDF, a PowerPoint file that you have here. It's the 24th page which enumerates those who are most corrupt, the leaders.
Perceived as.
Yes, yes, perceived as.
Yes,
according to this. We're going by this poll, yes.
Yeah, but I think, again, there is a problem first, I think, of language. And there's this idea that, okay, these people who are mentioned are the most corrupt or whatever, as Tom is trying to... This is just perception. So more people perceive Ruto as corrupt than do Kenyatta as corrupt. Doesn't mean, in essence, that Ruto is more corrupt than Kenyatta. That's for other arenas for that to be determined. So we have to know what it is that we are reporting. And I think there's a tendency for us to sort of try and simplify it, and many times to lose the substance in simplifying these things.
Okay.
I think you're right to point out that everybody goes to the 24th slide and starts from there, which for me, I think, is a problem in two ways. I think is a problem in the journalistic practice, in the sense that we want what is dramatic, what is sensational, what will sell papers. you know, and many times we don't actually look at what is really important, you know, what is the story behind that we're being told by this poll. So that...
But the approach, for instance, with the Daily Nation, let's take it for instance, right. You know, on the first day or the day after, then they would go with this figure of...
Yeah, I know all the...
I mean, then 2 days after, do a more, you know, processed story.
Everybody talks about the day 2 story.
Yes.
But really the media world has changed. We no longer have day 2 stories, you know. In essence, when that comes out, you know, the perceptions that you put out to begin with really have staying power, you know. And I think that it's not that the nation does not have the capacity and the ability to digest this in conjunction with people like Tom and stuff who actually carried out the polls to try and understand what they're saying. Even on that first day, they can do this, you know. But I think there is a certain amount of perhaps laziness, a certain amount of trying to be quick, to be fast, you know, with this, that we don't actually take the time to first do the journalism. You know, we just want, let us first get there, you know, and then we'll think about actually informing people a bit later, you know, which for me, I think is really having the cart before the horse. I would really prefer that we do the journalism, you know, find out what it is, have your interviews with people, understand what the poll is saying, and then go out there. The second thing, I think, and I think Tom might be able to help you guys out over here, is I think when the polls come out, I think it's the researchers have to try and explain what the findings are in a way that journalists will be able to pick and report fairly quickly. You know, and that's simply understanding the scenario we are in and everybody is rushing to do it. So perhaps there's also a task for people like Tom to be better at explaining what it is and getting away from, trying to push the media away from what the sensational bits are, but say this is the really important story behind it.
Well, as we may have seen, in addition to the PowerPoint of the charts,
there's an explanation.
We had a narrative document, 5 or 6 pages, trying to do that. Now, we didn't want to overload the media with that, but just some guidelines, some suggestions about what questions we were trying to answer and how were they captured in the particular questions, and kind of a summary of the data. And then there was a concluding comment at the end. But as you were talking, Patrick, it occurred to me that one thing that we didn't raise, but before I say that, to be a little bit fair to the media, within a matter of hours after the release at our offices, the story, in a way, became not the results, but the reaction of some individuals, by some individuals, which captured the headlines. So that I know in at least one daily paper, on Thursday, the headline was not the result of the poll in any of the results, but rather statements in reaction to it by some fairly senior people. And so that puts, I think, the media in a kind of a bind when they're getting their print ready for publication the previous evening. If people, especially important people in this country, have taken a stand of whatever nature, to just say, well, for the first day, we're just going to analyze the poll and we're going to black these people out. I don't think that's realistically open to what's going on in society. But just finally, I think where I think we could have done a better job is in deconstructing a bit this whole notion of corruption. Because it takes many, many forms. And I know from previous research that I've done, even before I started working for Ipsos Synovate Stedman with Transparency International, when we did a survey about, which included Kenyans' views of MPs. Now, we found that a majority of Kenyans will call members of parliament corrupt, not because of any illegality, but because they have used the power of legislation to increase their pay and perks. So we need, I think, to interrogate more specifically when people see this word ufisadi or corruption, what do they actually have in mind? Because it might include behavior that's not actually illegal.
David, before we take a break, David, but one can't say the media was inaccurate in what it portrayed. It perhaps just took what it felt would be of interest in the first place from what was given, from what was released.
Yes, well, without saying the media was inaccurate, because news judgment is entirely the work of the editor, as I said before.
Yes.
I want to set the media against Ipsos. The fact, in the opinion poll reporting guidelines issued by MCK, the first role of the media is to interrogate the pollster.
Very good.
Okay.
Yes. What was the methodology, the credibility, and reliability? You're doing that on behalf of the public. When you hear a few comments about, oh, we think that they interviewed very few people and all that, we need a few times the traditional sidebar, a comment about the methodology and all that. Such that then after you've done that, then you can now take and follow up what they have said, that they have released this and this, the questionnaire and all that. Ipsos has done a survey for us, and we spent an entire 8 hours in my boardroom discussing the methodology and how, when we digest the data, what happened and all that.
Yes.
And he knows that.
But surely you won't see a story being, headlined as this is a methodology used. It will be, this is the highlights, some of the highlights from this report, and then the methodology will be explained further.
Definitely yes. But what I'm trying to say is that when you get a point where we have, of course, Kenyans are quite skeptical, naturally,
yes,
you have a role to continuously interrogate. I am not doubting their work and all that, is not my work, but I say that the media now, we said that the media has one commitment to the story and nothing else, isn't it? So Wolf is calling you about the results. Tell him now, before you start screening the results, maybe we're going to screen them live and all that. Tell us first what you did.
Yeah,
and they do that.
If I may, I think the whole talk of methodology at some point, I think, kind of misses the argument. Yes, it is good and it's important to interrogate what the methodology is. But across the world, when you have credible institutions that you're dealing with, when polls are reported, it's very rarely that you're reporting the actual methodology, more the findings.
Yes.
And my problem with how we report the findings is we pick out what is sensational, and then we don't tell the story behind it. Yes. And I think also the example you gave of the paper, I think it was the Star, that reported the reaction by, and just what you show now from Waiguru and Ruto,
Deputy President.
You're letting them get away with making statements. So they say this is sponsored by our competitors. Well, how do you know that is true? Does somebody actually sit down with Ruto and ask him, how do you know this before you write the story? And I think when we get into this he said, she said thing, which our media loves, where you kind of disavow your responsibility to actually find out whether you're being told, what you're being told is accurate. I think you do the audience a big disfavor.
Okay.
So they shouldn't really be allowed to get away with these sort of blanket statements that are dismissive,
yes,
without having to actually explain them.
Okay. Let me take a break at this point. I'll leave you with a thought here. Wolf, this is Martin Munyoki. He says, what is the difference between perception and realistic indicators? He's watching from Salga Trading Center, and he just wonders in terms of how we can measure this in scientific research. It's 38 past the hour. We'll take our first break. We'll be back with more, even with the rules and the guidelines that are meant to guide our reportage on such polls.
Mambo ya opinion poll, ati wanatufanyia ukora, wanaenda kufanya ukora ya opinion poll pale, wanaona sisi ni wajinga Kenya hii. Kwani nani hajui iko shortage? Nimewaambia zamani na niliwaambia siku ile, iko shortage ya watu wajinga Kenya hii, kati ya gazeti ya kufunga nyama na barabara kama hii ya kutoka Endebess kwenda Swam. Nyinyi mtashindwa kuamua.
So here, I played that, and we play that for a reason. In the first part, you said we missed the plot when we let them get away with such comments. But I mean, to be honest as well, these are some of the captivating bites that people, we call them bites, that people always keep talking about. Did you hear what Ruto said? Did you hear what he so-and-so said? Perhaps we shouldn't have given it priority, but it still should feature.
My point isn't that you don't report it.
Yes.
My point is you interrogate it.
Right.
You know, so I mean, a good example is how Trump is reported. You know, he goes out, he wakes up in the morning, he tweets out something about South Africa. You know, but what is then reported is not just that he tweeted this out, but that it is actually untrue. And here is the context of it. That's what allows people to understand. You know, what we do is we play what Ruto has said, and we leave it at that, and we say, all right, you know, it's somehow an equivalent statement to Tom here sitting with his numbers and figures. You know, instead of the media actually sitting and saying, what is true here? Is it true, as Ruto asserts, that this is something sponsored by his competitors? His competitors. Is that true? And if it is not true, why isn't that reported in the same vein and at the same time that you report Ruto's statement?
Okay.
That is doing your journalism, rather than simply becoming a sounding board for politicians.
In your target, as you were getting to doing this research, what were you aiming to get? What were the areas that you were pursuing? Because you say this is part of a bigger report, or, you know, findings that you are yet to release.
You mean the topics?
Yes.
Basically the ones that David had mentioned. I mean, this survey, as I was saying earlier before we went on air, we basically have two categories of questions that Ipsos owns and loads. One consists of those that we try to ask in every survey. And this was actually our second survey of the year, not the first, second quarter. Like Kenya's direction, household economic conditions, what people think is the most serious problem in their locality, what they perceive to be the most serious problem in the country at the time, confidence ratings of particular officials and institutions. We try to ask every time about the level of criminal victimhood, but we didn't have room for that in this one. But the point with those questions is we like to do a trend and see over the years where things are going. Then we have another category of questions which are quite topical, based on what's been going on. And that's where this set of questions about corruption initially came from after the president went to the joint sitting of Parliament in 2015 and gave his State of the Nation address, when he had brought from the EACC the list of shame and so on, and really made this an issue. And you could see in our next poll, corruption, which had been maybe the fourth or fifth considered the most serious problem, now became the priority for Kenyans because the government had made it so. And by the middle of 2016, we had dropped those questions as we came closer to the election, and there was a lot of activity, Okoa, Kenya, about reform of IBC and so on, the demonstrations and whatever. So it was only in the wake of, or in response to, the government now bringing the anti-corruption issue back in a big way after the handshake, that we went back to that questionnaire from 2015 and sort of, you know, to bring these particular questions back. But just to answer your question, I mean, we've got questions on devolution, we've got questions on, as I say, the confidence ratings we haven't released yet, Kenya's relations with foreign countries, which is now quite topical, with the president seeing a number of leaders in a span of just a couple of weeks. And there are more questions about household economic conditions, and quite a few other topics, which we will release till we get tired and get ready for the next one. Okay. So partly it's based on what's going on. We might even ask some questions and think, okay, they're not topical now, so we won't release, but maybe next year they will be, and then we'll be able to show the trend. Okay. So there's quite a few topics, but the reason that we released this corruption material first is that for us to do a proper analysis of the data, unfortunately, maybe we're not efficient enough, but we can't get the data with the completion of the field work and then release the next day. We have to do some waiting, we have to look at the data and so on and so forth. So it was from the 2nd of August when the last interviews were completed. We didn't get this out for really 3 weeks. And almost every day, because of all the anti-corruption activity going on, we said we better get this chunk of material out first, or it's going to be even more out of date. And you know,
well, it's topical.
The government has announced now the Committee of 14 that there will be the National Conference on Corruption on 10th September. So we wanted to get this out early enough once we saw that was going to happen, because I think it's since maybe 2005 when John Githongo was PS in ethics, since we've had such a national conference. I mean, it's quite a major event.
So it's definitely not to set the tone for 2022 elections as it has. Some people have already, you know, released. This is actually an article that was on the Daily Nation by Professor Kagwanja, and he says, you know, in his view at least, that setting the context for the poll is the coming 2022 elections. In the light of this, the survey has catapulted corruption into a new political fault line, and you've gotten a lot of this reaction.
Well, but I mean, I would, with all due respect to Dr. Kagwanja, we were following, I think we were responding to what the government itself was doing.
And that's
what
right
put
now.
the issue on the table.
Okay. In terms of perception and perhaps even telling, let me look at the context and what else we could tell about this. There was a response there, and that is from Waiguru. How can you term someone as perceived most corrupt when there's no prosecution, successful prosecution? Now, those are some would say, the stories that we could have pursued in terms of giving credibility to this information.
Either Waiguru is pretending she doesn't know what an opinion poll is, because this is not a court case the media is reporting on. It's just perceptions, what people think.
Yes.
You know? And she might not like the fact that many people think she's corrupt. It doesn't mean that she is. It has nothing to do with whether or not she's been convicted or not convicted, or even whether or not she's been cleared. You know, this is just perceptions. That's what's being measured. This is what people think.
But then this is tied closely to media, because then they say, you know, as you've heard, hii magazeti wakisha ripoti wakifanya headlines zao, then are we playing that part in shaping that perception?
But just, sorry, 1 minute. Yeah. Now, Gathara, I read in the paper yesterday that the governor has written really a demand letter to EACC to revisit that affidavit from three years ago. Would she have done that had it not been for her annoyance with this? So at the end, this can actually cleanse her.
You never know. You're trying to
that's my point. That it's actually, these sorts of polls, one of the things that they can do is actually spur real concrete action from these people.
Okay.
You know, where we actually get now to discuss, which is an affidavit filed in court, you know, what does that then mean? And let's see if it's been either cast aside.
You don't see a correlation
I think
there.
what is happening, well, there are many correlations. Everything is linked to some string. But what is happening is that we have a confusion between perceptions and legality and all that.
Okay.
The letter to EACC and the judicial process are legal processes.
True.
And they have to be documented and judgments given. But then there is perception. That's where you're taken through a legal process, and the judge pronounces themselves, and the people think the judges, the courts were unfair. You're taken through a process in Parliament, a committee interrogates and do that, and they release their report, and people think this report is not professional. So we need not confuse those two. Okay. Number two, the media exists to also shape public opinion. What I think the media hasn't gone further to do in trying to defend its space is go back to these same people attacking opinion polls, because these people have been around the political circles for more than 10 years. They have reacted to different opinion polls in different ways over the years. So just ideally ask them when did they change their minds about this? Because we have had these people at some point praising opinion polls done through the same methodology, when they were high or low. So in a way, the way to defend yourself and say we are only reporting what is happening is showing that this person, when he was being favored, they reacted this way. Now they're not being favored, they are reacting this way. So that needs to be, because over time, it is a battle for legitimacy. And we have seen when we battle for legitimacy with everybody, sometimes including let me not say, well, let's say we contradict religious leaders, the judiciary, parliament, and all that. So legitimacy, even the media now, the history about ya kufunga nyama and all that is about legitimacy. And the media must from time to time move ahead and do that. I know we have been very strong at the Media Council telling certain media houses to stop writing about themselves because nobody wants to buy a newspaper to read about the media house that did it. Yes. But some point when the media is under attack, you must say, look here, you say, gazeti ni kufunga nyama, it's okay. But 3 months ago, this happened and you said this. What has changed? Then you can now let Kenyans perceive and decipher whether this person is genuine or it's because they are now on the other side of the ring and they're throwing stones. Okay. That means that from time to time, you must also protect your space because you are for the state and it's an institution that operates because of integrity, the trust in the people. So when someone is attacking your trust, there's a way you should do without directly rebuffing them and all that.
All right.
If I may say something about opinion polls, I think one of the things that's really, really important is for us to also be able to, it's a mirror on society and to try to understand what Kenyans are thinking and where the gaps are between this. I mean, during the break, I was giving the example of the fact that we all keep talking about that what we really require to fight corruption is political will. But is this really what Kenyans think? Because you find if 51%, according to the poll, think that the president is sincere in fighting corruption, but only 21% think that it is certain that he will succeed, then apparently it's not his will that they think matters. Right. You know, so we need to then start interrogating those narratives that we've grown up with, we've grown up thinking, you know, about. You know, the whole idea that if you look at again one of the slides where you've got the trend from I think about 2011, showing that most people most of the time think the country is going in the wrong direction, but yet we're still quite an optimistic lot. You know, when asked whether whether the president will succeed. You know, those who think it's either possible, likely, or certain are what? Nearly 70%.
Correct.
You know, who think so. So again, what is this telling us about Kenyans and about how they are thinking? How is it that they perceive of corruption and how it should be fought?
Okay.
You know, and I think if we start thinking around that, then we are able to gather better insights. And I think even for the media, to see where are the gaps in how people understand issues. You know, and how can we improve our reporting? Because in the end, the success of the media should be gauged not by your bottom lines, you know, but by whether the audience you're speaking to actually understands the issues that are facing them. Okay. You know, I think that's the job.
There's a connection there with the questions that you're asking. You know, the names that you feel are, you know, the people that you perceive to be most corrupt, and from the stories you've heard. So there's a part that's played by the media in this, in shaping the perceptions.
Yes, and if I can just add in response, one point, and that is when we have a national sample of 2,000, you know, that statistical margin of error of plus or minus 2.2 is in the industry and the profession quite acceptable. But I think one question we need to ask in interrogating the data, the people are asking the questions, what is the variation in their level of information when they're being presented with such a question? For example, we found in this same survey, when we asked, who's the President of the United States? We found that people with no formal education, only 18% could name Donald Trump. People with any education above mid-level college, that is university and postgraduate, it's 98, 99%. Now, when you make the assumption, Mark, that people are informed by media,
yes,
we also need to get back to some of the kind of data that we did in collaboration with the Media Council in the first survey, the earlier part of this year, to really interrogate what media are people getting access to at one level. What percentage of our respondents ever read a newspaper, let alone daily? Which ones are listening to what radio stations and so on? Because the perceptions of where people stand in terms of corruption, or even their understanding about the issues, how serious it is or not, may reflect the level of information they have about the topic. And that's why it's sometimes frustrating that we don't have usually the finance for interviewing 10 or 20,000 people.
Because people are asking, just before you finish and I take another break, people asking, there's one gentleman in that, the views, tuwaoni hapa mashinani. It's only 2,016 people. And they don't feel it's representative of their views. That's what we always hear about these responses to the polls.
Well, I wasn't hearing exactly that. What I thought he was saying was a bit stronger. That is, we don't even think they even came because we didn't see anybody going around with a clipboard or whatever.
Yes.
Now, first of all, they wouldn't know because our interviewers don't wear Ipsos jerseys like a football team. They're just moving around like other people. And they have a smartphone in their pocket. And so now they do have an identification badge. I could give you some data which we also included in this survey later, because we asked, did you or did anybody in your household experience an interview before the last election? And we got some interesting data about that. For people who are unhappy with the results, they can point to any weakness in the methodology that they might. But all I'm saying is that in this particular case, they wouldn't know if we had been in any particular area or not. And because the interviews are all take place in people's residences, at their household, we don't pick people on the street because we can't randomize the sample. We could have had 1 million interviewers where this fellow comes from, and he wouldn't have known we were there.
Right. Okay, let me take a break at that point, but something to think about, and as we get to the concluding part of the program. Bernard Gitonga says the Ipsos survey would have covered other candidates aspiring to be presidents versus William Ruto and other sitting governors versus Anne Waiguru. It would have made some sense in that case.
He obviously didn't see the press release.
Yes.
Because this was an unprompted question. We said, first of all, which names have you heard mentioned in association connection with certain scandals? We never posed any names. And as you can see in the data, almost all the leaders in this country were mentioned, but a different level of percentages.
Yes.
So everybody is there. You know, even if we haven't had a lot of noise from some of the others, but hardly anybody was left out. I don't know if Kathara was mentioned.
Moyo, I want you to tell us a bit about the guidelines that you have out for the media in covering such polls and what you think should have been done better and what we should consider in the days to come. We're also looking at foreign perception now to Kenya. There's a lot happening. The president is in the United States, has just met Donald Trump, and will be meeting Theresa May on Thursday, and so that's a big deal, and then going to China. So something about that as we conclude this conversation on the polls and how we digest these findings for you. Stay with Presspass. Welcome back to the conversation. This is the last part of it, and we'll really try and make it quick because there's a lot of responses here. Henry Muller says, my question is not, and I've just selected it here because there were quite many. My question is not the method used by if the guys conducting the polls really do a follow-up to make sure if their guys on the field are truly mixing with people out there, because they may be filling the questionnaires for them. Something about, you know, how...
You want me to respond to that?
Yes.
Yeah. In this high-tech age, our interviewers use smartphones, which show the precise GPS location of where they are. So, unlike the old days when people used paper questionnaires,
yes,
if somebody is supposed to be interviewing someone in a certain block in Kariobangi, but instead they're sitting on Ranulangala Street in some restaurant having chai and mandazi, we see that immediately in real time, and those people are sacked.
Okay.
We also have secret recordings embedded into many of our questions, and in real time, our quality control team is listening. So if somebody asks a question, for example, do you prefer tea or coffee? if we think people might cheat on that in terms of how our interviewers, how they're recorded, and someone says tea, and we see they've marked on the phone, response coffee, again, those people, interviewers, are sacked.
Okay.
So it's very, very difficult these days for them to enter false information, either in terms of where they are and how they're recording questions. I can't say it's 100% foolproof, but it's very, very close. And then we do callbacks because we collect mobile phone numbers and we check, this is so-and-so, Mrs. Susan, were you really interviewed by one of our interviewers yesterday? And by the way, what did you say your education level was? And so on. And all our interview teams that are placed all over the country, they know they're being scrutinized.
Okay.
And so unless they want to be shown a red card, they adhere to the protocols pretty regularly.
Chitab Chego says, I feel Ipsos' opinion poll was geared to undermine the DP by getting him on the headlines in a negative light. The perception headline is actually character assassination, juicy news, party time for haters.
Well, again, look at the poll itself, you know, and I think lots of these reactions that we're hearing are really as a result of how the media reports it, how the media chooses to report the story. So everybody thinks the poll was about Ruto, you know. Yet, as you mentioned yourself, it's slide number 24. You know, there's a bunch of many other slides. It's not a poll that is designed to go after Ruto, and in fact, it is the people who are reacting, who are framing it that way. And we've got to interrogate how they get to do that.
Okay.
And I think a lot of that is because the media makes it about a particular topic or a particular person. You know, I think till the media itself starts interrogating how it responds to these polls, how it reports these polls, and whether it's actually doing its readership a disservice by making them seem to be what they are not.
But perhaps it wasn't, it's how things played out and the responses that came right after from the leaders especially. And as part of the response, listen to this, Felix Washira says, I think the report has generated much heat because of the latest effort by anti-corruption agencies. People fear to be in the spotlight on corruption issues at a time like this. Let's not lose the sight of the focus in the fighting corruption by hyping the discussion on the Ipsos report. In your view, as a journalist, you know how it plays out. You go out, you listen to Tom, and your editor will ask you, Mark, story ilikuwa nini? And then you say, there's an interesting aspect here. Inasema, perception ya kwamba, DP, na Waiguru, number 1, number 2. Okay. Then we try and get reactions. And we get those reactions. So that's how it's played out for most of the newsrooms. So it's not, do you see it having played out any different?
Not really. I mean, I said before that while I have issues about certain editorial judgments and which story angle we pick from time to time in the newsroom, it is the editor's sole responsibility to decide what story goes out. We say that the editor has a contract with the public to pick the most important, the most relevant story to them. A few times, especially in our country, I think we do too much politics. We just feed. We are talking 2022 all over the place. Okay. A day after the elections, we feed that. So, number one, that while we have that freedom to choose the story, we sometimes pick the sensational and leave out. We spoke earlier about other important findings in the survey that were not mentioned. Of course, they became the story after the story and all that. And the question is, why didn't we think that the percentage of Kenyans, or rather only one region of Kenya is thinks we're moving in the right direction? Why didn't we think that would be the biggest story and all that? And I think it's about exposure and continuous engagement. Because if you look at our media, we have an obsession about politics. You go to Tanzania, the media is obsessed about artists and musicians and all that. Different media have their own perspective to things. Okay. But secondly, about the reactions then, it is about the guideline that speaks about you must include comments and reactions before you publish, is we are not converting the poll findings into a Bible or the Quran in this case. We are trying to, because it's a perception, so then the media needs to get people to react to and fro. And of course, there's the whole issue about you're getting legally protected, that the pollster has released a finding to you, but the pollster, having interviewed Kenyans, you have a duty and access to a few Kenyans to ask to, in a way, validate and show that you do not pick. Remember, we always talk about a one side in the story.
Yes.
So you're trying to validate the pollster and get Kenyans to react. Problem is that we attack what we do not agree with, but I think not just in Kenya. We have seen in a country where every news agency is being called fake news, just because some people don't agree with them. So it always goes further to show that journalists are not just guys who sit around. We're not just gossipers who sit around, hear something and then amplify it. We try to validate and cross-check with other people.
Okay.
It's basically a requirement of the code of conduct, and it's basically, it goes to legitimize and show that we are professional people. You are different from the guys who just hear a story halfway and they learn to start amplifying it.
Yes.
Yes.
And there's a booklet here with the guidelines, and I'll give you a chance to say that. And Gadara, you have something to say. And it has, I think, 14 points that should be guiding us. I'll let you read that in conclusion. Tom, first.
Well, I just wanted to come back to one point you had asked earlier from, I think, one of your viewers on what's the difference between perceptions and indicators. And I would make the contrast between perception data, how people feel about something or what people think might be true, and actual experience.
Yes.
I mean, when we ask people, have you been a victim of crime in the last 3 months, we assume people will give us facts. That's an experience question, an unfortunate one, as opposed to what direction do you think the country is moving in, and so on and so forth. So, and we have to make it clear on an issue like this that these are perception questions. Now, when we asked, what measures do you think could be put in place to make the fight against corruption more effective? That's an opinion question. It's not really a perception. It's an opinion question. And just to give you one example, there was a survey done 3 years ago in the US by Public Policy Research, an organization. And they interviewed people who had come out of, voters who had come out of the voting place. And they asked, among other questions, whether these voters agreed that the US military should bomb the country of Agrabah that was a security threat to the United States. And something like 40% of them, both Democrats and Republicans, said yes. And yet Agrabah doesn't even exist. It was just a fantasy country in the Disney film Aladdin. So perceptions can easily be completely, faulty.
Yes.
And we have to keep that in mind.
All right. And, yes,
I just wanted to just a quick comeback on the idea of the media validating things. And I think that's a really, really important thing. But we shouldn't think that they are going to rerun the poll so as to validate what they did. There is a sense, I think, in which we confuse two things. And we think that the media validating the accuracy of something means reporting both sides. I recently had this illustration of people having an argument about whether it's raining outside. And the media, in our case, would probably report this guy said it's raining, the other guy said it's not. But their real job is really just look out the window, see whether it's raining, and report that. So I think in terms of validation, and this is where it's important for them to be looking at things like methodologies and stuff, this is how they validate what it is. Simply reporting that Ruto is saying that the poll is rubbish is not validating it. It is not testing it. The poll stands by itself. Look at that. And it is good to get reaction, and that is fine. But don't confuse that for whether or not you're saying the poll is valid. That's an entirely different question. I don't even think Ruto is himself qualified to be answering that.
Yes.
But it's also easier if you would have 5, 10, 15, 20 survey firms using the same methodology and asking the exact same questions to compare. Unfortunately, we don't have enough firms in Kenya so that the consumers have to rely on 1, 2, maybe 3 firms, and that's a challenge.
And perhaps my director will be able to look at this. I really want us to get to the concluding remarks. And Bwana Omoyo, what I have here on screen is the Media Council of Kenya Guidelines for Election Coverage. And I believe it's on the 17th page that we have some of the guidelines that we should be following up. Actually, this is on the 19th page right here. The 14 points that should be followed, but it also starts here from the page 18. Opinion polls, but this was in the context of electioneering period where most of the opinion polls come out, a lot, more than usual.
No, well, one thing that the guideline says, you're not going to ask now the media to be doing their own opinion poll to validate an opinion poll that has been done by the pollster. You ask the media to question the pollster, who's supposed to be the authority in opinion polling.
Yes.
That's what we say. The guideline number one is you must look at the credibility of the person, the institution, the methodology. You could ask to look at the questionnaires and all that. It's actually the first requirement before you go to what they found out. Otherwise, going the way that you try to run a few forms and all that, then you become a policy yourself. That means that if you have a medical case reported by the doctors, you try to do your own medical process to validate that. Instead, it's trying to get to find the credibility of what has been released.
Right.
Secondly, it's about the issues of balance and fairness, corruption, diversity and inclusion of peoples and other ideas where it comes. But again, you see, if an authority has done an opinion poll, then you go and ask a politician to comment about the opinion poll. Well, you have tried to balance, but really you have an authority.
You've gotten reactions from the politicians who were mentioned in the report.
Yes,
so, yeah,
that is all you do, but you must then go further and as I said earlier, get how these politicians reacted to other polls that mentioned them positively. Otherwise, you are putting a horse and a car in a competition. One uses diesel, another uses blood or energy and all that. The point is that you get a politician is about what they feel and their constituents, isn't it?
Right.
He has not gone out through the country and interviewed people, but it's just his opinion. He will definitely say no.
And his interests.
So you're basically not, you're comparing, as I said, a horse and a cow, or rather a horse and a hen in a competition because they are not the same. So as you move out to balance, do the validity and try to get certain authorities. And number two is if this person has said no, if you think that it's wrong for them to have said that, you must show us facts that, so are you saying the opinion polls is wrong? Or so why did you say support this previous opinion poll? Are you then the problem in this case? If you do that continuously, then you're going, it's like you're naming and bringing these people out to show them that these are guys who are just attacking for their own political expediency. So the question is, and remember, the Code of Conduct and all the guidelines, they all point out towards the sacred principle of self-regulation.
Okay.
So these are supposed just really guidelines to make sure that the guys making editorial decisions abide to overall guidelines and do a professional job so that you can satisfy the public.
And I'll let this be on the screen for a bit so that people can read this. 14-point, some of the guidelines that we have here in terms of coverage of the opinion polls. And this is some of these, especially in the context of an election, but this is also general in such a case that we have right here, the 14 questions that we should be able to ask whenever there's an opinion question, opinion count on NTV. Now, Tom Wolf, your final comment on this. Yes.
Although you need to ask, it's a question I've been wondering. I think Tom might be placed to answer this, and whether some of the disputes that we have regarding polls come from how the media has been a bit cavalier in how it deals with polls. We saw, especially, I mean, we see them after every newscast, sort of these surveys of our readers, etc. And you always say they're not scientific, but the fact that you keep presenting them, then that might go some way towards people not seeing that there is actually need and that this is not the same as a scientific poll.
But there's also guidelines to this.
Yeah, it might generally degrade the whole idea of polling. And the second thing is, I remember, especially after the election, the August one, 2017, KTN running what they called an exit poll, which did not ask the question all exit polls ask, which is how did you vote?
I think it was in 5 counties.
And that for me was a bit problematic. Again, you're playing cavalier with this, and you then start building in the minds of people that polls are not really things that you should take seriously. They're things you can play around with. There's no real science to it. When actually, I think Tom might argue that it's actually quite a well-established way of finding out what people think. And I think if you look over the period, it's the other comeback you should have to all these politicians. Every time we've gone into an election, we've had polls, lots of them seem to reflect exactly what was being put out.
Okay.
So it's not the case that these are just numbers that are made up.
All right, and this is also captured in the guidelines in terms of how we should be able to work with polls that are in, phone-ins or SMS opinion polls on NTV, on live shows, or whichever station it is. Your last comments on this before I get into the international radar.
Sure. I think my last comment would be to recall the fact that about a year before the last election,
yes,
Ipsos organized a series of training workshops for media practitioners with the assistance of the Editors Guild. Mm-hmm. And we ran a number of workshops for print and electronic journalists who, looking towards the election, would have important roles in reporting, yes, not just the election, but also any pre-election surveys that would be produced, whether by us or any other firm. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing which is kind of a takeaway for me from the last couple of days is that I think this type of training, and also from what my friends have also said, is something that really should be ongoing. Okay. We shouldn't just engage in this a year before election where political temperatures are rising, but we should, and hopefully we can start soon. And of course, it's up to a media house if they want to send their people, yeah, to the Ipsos office for this. But I think all of us can do a better job in upping our game, whether it's actually doing, because people who come to our releases sometimes ask good questions. For example, last week, somebody asked, did you ask a single question about the public's awareness of a corruption scandal within their county? Mm. And that really took me, aback. That's a wonderful idea. Yeah. We'll include that in a future question. Very good to see what's the level of awareness, because perceptions at that level, closer to home, might be a lot more accurate. So yeah, the more we interact with your colleagues in media, I think we can do a better job, and hopefully the media can too. Mm. So it's not too early. Let this be an ongoing. I'm not aware in media studies, communication studies in the different universities, how many of them, I've been invited to give lectures and so on, but in terms of serious academic study of the strengths and weaknesses of surveys and so on, how the media reports, all these issues that we've been covering tonight, I think looking ahead to 2022, not to try to raise temperatures, but I think this is a good time to pick up the training module again, mm-hmm, and see if we can start getting preparations. I'm sure if you give us a good discount, I'm sure it's and a lunch. We give you a lunch also. All right, and now to something that might even feature in future polls for you, and that is the foreign relations and foreign perceptions of Kenya. And not too long ago, probably 2 hours ago, President Uhuru Kenyatta was with U.S. President Donald Trump. They met and had a quick signing of deals, and with some quoted as to the tune of 50 billion shillings in terms of deals between Kenya and the United States. And on Thursday, there's a big meeting also expected. We're expecting a big guest here on Thursday. That is from Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister. And then there's a trip to China. And all this is in terms of building international relations and bringing more fortune for the nation. So this will feature in our headlines. How would you like to see it feature besides just the figures of what has been signed?
Well, I'm sure we'll have the big headline of is it 50 billion, yes, signed, and the nice photo op. But I really want the media to go into the details. What has actually been signed? What has been discussed? What was not discussed during it? We've seen the changes between how we interact with, especially Western governments. Before such a meeting will probably not be complete without some form of lecture on our corruption or yes, human rights or democratic credentials. I doubt that was a basis of any such discussion, given Trump's own problems in those fields. But it would be interesting to actually try and contextualize how the meeting went. I find one of the things that I find really fascinating are the similarities between Kenyatta and Trump. From all the talk of rubbishing the press, Kenyatta pioneered this idea ya kufunga nyama, etc. We've seen Trump talking about fake news. Right. They're both really like wealthy people who ran for office were not really expected to win. You know, remember Kenyatta with the ICC hanging over him, Trump with all his ridiculous statements. People really thought they would win, yet they went, they won, you know, etc. So I think there are for me, very many interesting similarities between this. And I think the chemistry between them might be quite something to watch. I heard Ali Kansachu talking about, given especially the statements that Trump has made about Africa, you know, from shithole countries.
Yes, it's past tense, so you can say that.
etc.
The media can't see this.
I just quickly say that it's, I mean, the way, for example, we saw Kiraithi covering up for that, you know, that we've really gone out of our way not to antagonize them, Trump or anything. I think the chemistry between the two men for me would be quite an interesting topic to hear. How did it actually go?
Play out.
Did they come out? And Ali Kansachi, just one last thing, was on BBC Today. I think he was speaking about how Kenya might position, Kenyatta could position himself as an interlocutor for the rest of Africa with Trump. You know, and I don't know whether that is something that would probably be in the
But isn't there anything in this story to celebrate as we tell the story? Are there positives? Because there's a lot of...
I think before you go to the positives, I have a question. What happened to international news in our electronic media? Why don't we have any internet, unless there is a scandal or some bomb blast or some attack?
Yeah.
You know, we grew up and we listened to one radio, and there was local news, there was international in the region and all that. And sometimes you can watch, including NTV, for a week, and there is no single international news article. That what has happened is that continuously then we have locked Kenyans in. If Kenyans, we know we have a small percentage who rely entirely on our few media houses for all their news consumption. So they have nothing, that nobody knows what is happening, unless we have some little Bobby Wine has been attacked and all that. So I think that this goes back to news judgment, that you have a role as a journalist to also allow your audience to interact with other jurisdictions and compare, so that we have that crisis. So that when we have now, if Uhuru was not out, because I expect the media, for example, tomorrow to tell us about, there was a very bad comment of Trump about the Nigerian president.
Yes.
It came out earlier today. So he has met a Kenyan president. I've actually seen someone telling the president tonight to watch Donald Trump's tweets tonight very closely, because he has a way of reacting. Yeah, in case they but so the idea is we expect a little more contextualization.
Yes.
And I think that refusal to allow Kenyans to interact with the world out there has boxed Kenyans in. We do not know how the world reacts to certain situations, so we have to invent anything, even though it has happened everywhere across the continent.
I can hear my director say this is, you know, we're getting into the international radar. This is actually, I should have introduced it as the international radar, because it's what should be informing our conversation beyond our borders. And you've just touched on it. We should be featuring more international stories on this.
Do we have an international desk to start with?
Not a desk, I have to be honest. We don't have an international desk, but we have access to Reuters.
Well, stories from around the world. There's one other thing that I think I need to add to my previous comments, which is when it comes to reporting this meeting, we should also, I think, and this should have been done also in the run-up to the meeting, is to articulate what are our interests, what are the things that we are actually chasing, you know, and what are the things that when we go there we want him to come out with. I mean, there's got to be discussions, for example, about Somalia and what's happening there. We're withdrawing troops, they're ramping up their activities there. You know, what's going on? You know, what do we want them to do? You know, over there, I think the issue between the US and Rwanda over second-hand clothes might have implications for us, given that we want to build also our own textile industry. Do we go there and suddenly we find that we can't start cutting down on second-hand clothes, you know, etc. That doesn't become an option that we have, you know, our access to things like AGOA, etc. All these are things that really we should have staked out what are our positions, what are the things we want out of that summit, and then we can use that to hold Kenyatta to account. So when he's announcing his numbers, we'll be able to say ourselves independently, these are the things we wanted out of that summit, and how many of those did he actually take?
Okay, Tom, you were showing me earlier the cartoon in today's Nation which captured a bit of some of the issues in terms of external powers in Kenya's development in that cartoon. And also, if I'm correct, I think it was Alan Alingo in East African has written one or two quite extensive pieces on some of the issues involved, including security and the competition with China and so on and so forth. And also, I'm not doing any public relations job for the president when you compared him with Trump, but actually, if you look at our data over the last 3 years, 4 years, President Kenyatta's approval ratings have always been about twice as high as Donald Trump's, for better or worse. I mean, that's so I think they may have, you know, whatever similarities you can see.
Yes.
But I think the differences are probably more important and would favor the president of this country. He's certainly not under investigation for the kind of criminal activity that Trump is facing now.
Yes.
Yeah. And I hear there's what I was reading on the internet earlier today, that there's absolute panic in the White House now over what has happened in the last week. Without getting into those details. But just finally, I mean, I think one important aspect of the president's trip there and what you people do is to get some idea of what kind of information, especially Kenyan media, have access to and how they get the information about the story. I mean, I think I saw one report saying that they were not the two presidents going to hold an open press conference at the end of the discussion. And maybe that's incorrect. Maybe they've had it already. But how do you, whether it's in a foreign country or when the president comes back, where's the source of information? Is it just handouts from the presidential press unit?
Yes.
Or are there people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who are willing to talk off record and give sort of more background, more context and nuance? I mean, that's a challenge for the media in any country, but in addition to knowing what came out of this, it's good, I think, for readers and viewers to get an idea from media practitioners of what are the challenges in getting access to the information that provides that context.
Yeah, and I can tell you even in preparation for Thursday, there is accreditation as it normally happens for such high stakes meetings, and it'll be a number of people that will be able to access State House, and then an opportunity for questions to be asked, and that's the access that we will have in terms of the information that we can get. But in terms of details, where can we meet her? What will she be doing? What will be signed? If there are any agreements, it'll be straight from State House, and I'm sure you know this, and that's the case even with the
United States.
But
do you have people who travel with the president and takes these trips? Or
yes, not every media house. I believe Citizen are the ones who have a representative.
Because I think one of the problems, and I think this is something that media should really be careful about, is when they start running press releases from the PSCU as if they are news pieces. And we've seen that a lot of times. So it's essentially the presidency being allowed to report on itself. And that's
actually laziness.
Yeah, that's really, really bad. And I think, I mean, we need to invest a bit more in being able to report on, and I know there are issues to do with access and there are problems, but that's how you develop your sources. That's why you work towards getting the story and going beyond the press release you're given to actually find out what's the story behind that.
Okay. And with that, we end Presspass. Thank you so much for your views that you've sent in, and I'm sure you've seen some of the comments that you were sending in via Twitter. And thank you, gentlemen, for your time here on Presspass. Patrick Gadara, curator at theelephant.info. Yes, you should visit that. A lot of independent views on what's happening. And Media Council CEO, Bwana David Omoyo, always keeping an eye on us and what we're doing. Thank you very much for that. And Tom Wolf, he also keeps an eye on us. He sends me messages as I'm doing stories or what have you.
You can sue me for harassment.
No, it's okay. I believe there's some other suits coming. No, I'm just joking. But on that point, oh yeah, and gentlemen, 2-0 to Tottenham. As you had predicted, I believe it was, one of yes. Tottenham 2, Man U 0, and that's the score that we have tonight. We were discussing it before we started the program, but thank you so much, gentlemen, for missing that game on behalf of the viewers, and thank you for watching. My name is Mark.